Forum for Autism is a parent support group to support families of children with autism. It was set up in the year 2002 under the Indian Trust Act 1950. Forum for Autism mainly aims at creating awareness about autism, empowering parents to advocate for rights of persons with autism. Forum for Autism is a parent body which runs two libraries in Kolaba and in Vashi with around 500 books. It also conducts parent training workshops, seminars, and talks. It has a database of parents and professionals and provides sponsorship to unaffording families. Forum for Autism participates in various activities. To name a few are Mumbai Marathon, conducted workshops for parents with young adults, celebration of World Disability Day at Malad Basti, and self-help skill workshop. Since the lockdown, Forum for Autism is continuing its work online. It has been conducting webinars on various topics like preparing to choose the boards, homeschooling, storytelling sessions, setting up residential setup, to name a few. All the parents who are interested can check those webinars on YouTube. Chef Sanjeev Kapoor and commentator Harsha Bhogle are the cause ambassadors for Forum for Autism. Throughout the lockdown, FFA, that is Forum for Autism, along with ASK, that is Adult Support Kendra, is offering online individual counseling, family counseling, parent support, apart from various other services. To know more about these services, please contact Nicole Kapadia and Suhasini Sundaresan on the numbers mentioned. Join our journey. Be an active part of Forum for Autism. To know more, please call on the phone numbers on your screens. Thank you for your overwhelming response to our webinars. Forum for Autism requests you to donate generously so it helps in our future endeavors. All the donations are eligible for the tax exemption. Please follow us on social media for updates on workshops organized by Forum for Autism. Please follow our Facebook page, Forum for Autism. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our website www.forumforautism.org.
Hello, everybody. I'm Samruddhi Patkar, and I extend my warm welcome to all the wonderful parents who have juggled their time to be with us on this lovely, beautiful evening. They say that we cannot take responsibility for the world that shapes our minds, but we definitely can take the responsibility for the world that is created in our minds. On that thought, let me introduce to you the speaker for today's session. Today we have amongst us Sarika Pandit. She's a psychotherapist with InVivo Counselling Services. After a master's in counseling psychology and PG diploma in counseling from TIS, she is trained in Advanced REBT, that is Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, from Albert Ellis Institute, New York, and single session therapy. She's also a co-founder of an NGO that works in the area of creating safer spaces for children and adults. So parents, without taking much of your time, I take this opportunity to welcome Sarika. Thank you, Sarika, for being here with us. And before we start, just a small note. Your comments and the interaction with the speaker have to be on the chat box below. And the question answers would be taken at the end of this session by the speaker, and you have to note the question answers in the Q&A section. So thank you once again, and over to you, Sarika.
Thank you so much, Samriddhi, for that introduction. So as you all know, today the topic that I will be discussing is dealing with anger and anxiety. And I think this is something that a lot of us have struggled with, especially in the last 1 year, which has been challenging on so many fronts. The pandemic, and not just the pandemic, but the uncertainty and the loss that we have seen all around us. So anger and anxiety are two emotions which I think we can all say have been regular visitors in some form or the other in our homes, within us. And so today's discussion, therefore, today's talk, therefore, is really about trying to unpack both these emotions, that of anger and that of anxiety, really trying to understand them. And then also, like Samriddhi said, strategies that can help to really cope with both of these emotions. So I'm going to share my screen and then we will begin. Right. So I think the first thing to really understand is, just a sec. I'm just trying to scroll down, just facing a little bit of a challenge there. So if you all could just bear with me. Okay. Right. Okay. Sorry about that. So let's continue. So the first thing that I really want to start with is understanding anger itself as an emotion. Now, I think out of all the emotions that we experience as human beings, anger is perhaps the most misunderstood emotion. It's the oldest emotion, but it's also one of the most misunderstood emotions. The reason I say that it's misunderstood is because our typical reaction to anger tends to be, don't feel it. If there is someone who tries to express anger in some form or the other, our reaction within ourselves and towards that person is, don't feel it. Don't feel anger. Don't get angry, right? So is that really the best approach? And we'll try and understand that through today's webinar. So before that, if I were to really try to unpack anger, it is in fact an emotion which is a very normal part of the human emotional experience. And anger carries a message, it serves a purpose. So it's not an emotion that is purposeless. There is a certain message that anger carries. There is a certain purpose that anger carries. Usually, when one feels anger, it happens when there is some kind of violation of our personal boundary, or there is some kind of threat to us, right? And so the emotion itself goes way back. When we were hunter-gatherers, for instance, anger used to play a very important role, in the sense that if there was someone trying to take away our property or encroach upon our land or trying to take away something that belonged to us, anger would kick in. And what the anger would help to do is to actually follow it up with some kind of an action. So a way to protect whatever it is that is being threatened to be taken away, or in some way, some kind of an assertive action to protect ourselves. Right? The point here being that certain amount of anger, therefore, is necessary to our survival. And therefore, anger itself is not the enemy. We often say that anger is a bad emotion. It's a negative emotion. I'd like us to look at anger as an emotion. It's unpleasant, but it is an emotion that can be useful, and it is an emotion that carries a message with it. However, that said, anger can be of two types, just like stress can be of two types. So perhaps some of you know that when we think of stress, not all stress is bad. There's some stress which can be a good thing. However, if there's too much of stress, then that can be problematic. So some stress can be good in the sense that, let's say I have, some job or some task to do. Now, if I didn't feel any stress, I may not prepare, or I may not take the steps to prepare myself for that task, right? So some stress can be a good thing, but the moment the stress becomes too much to manage, or if it becomes too overwhelming, then that becomes a problem. So in the same way, anger also has two types. There is the healthy anger, and then there is the unhealthy anger. And let's try to understand both these types of anger so that the next time when you experience anger, you can look inwards and decide, is the anger healthy or is the anger unhealthy and therefore problematic? So what is healthy anger? The first thing is that healthy anger is something that can be managed. Now, if I try to look at anger, there's a whole spectrum to feeling anger, right? So you have rage on one hand, which is on one end of the spectrum, and then you have mild irritation on the other end of the spectrum. Whatever it may be, if the anger is something that is manageable, and by manageable, what I mean is that if I can put it aside, if I can look at it, if I can understand it and then put it aside and then continue to function in a way that I am not feeling overwhelmed by the anger, then that is healthy anger. Because that healthy anger is carrying a message. It is saying to me that something is not okay. And therefore, it is urging me to take some kind of assertive action. So not aggressive, but assertive action. So therefore, healthy anger is also something that can be expressed assertively and healthy, right? And there is a sense of responding to a situation with healthy anger rather than reacting. Now, what happens when we are reacting? Reacting is often impulsive, right? So if anger is not healthy, then a reaction could possibly mean yelling, shouting, screaming, hitting, and so on and so forth. But if it is responding, what responding by definition means that there is some pause. There is a sense of not being impulsive, but looking at the anger, acknowledging the anger, processing it, and then expressing it in a healthy way. And all of this means that it is not impulsive. It's not just a quick knee-jerk reaction to whatever it is that is happening. So if we were to have a goal with respect to anger, it's not to eliminate anger, right? The idea is not to eliminate anger or to deny anger or to suppress anger. The idea is to move to a space of healthy anger, right? Where the anger is validated, the experience of anger is validated, but it's expressed in a healthier way. Now, if that was healthy anger, what does unhealthy anger look like, right? And this is really where the problem lies. So unhealthy anger, and I think a lot of us at different times, I'm sure in the last 1 year, maybe a lot of us have probably expressed anger in unhealthy ways. We've experienced unhealthy anger. And maybe some of you all can relate to what I put up on this slide, which is that the sense that the anger is getting out of control, right? The sense that it's turning destructive. The sense that the anger is almost bigger than me, right? That it's too overwhelming, right? In a way that I can't even function, right? So I can't even go about doing the work that I need to do, or tending to my children, or just carrying on in my relationship, because the anger is so overwhelming that it pretty much puts a shadow on everything. Now, obviously, this kind of anger is going to lead to problems. It's going to lead to problems at work. It's going to lead to problems in relationships. It's going to affect health as well, right? Because carrying so much of that anger is destructive to one's health as well and one's immune system. Now, what does unhealthy anger look like in terms of expression? So one is open aggression, right? Which is lashing out. It could mean yelling, shouting, completely losing it, right? It could even mean physical assault, abuse, any of those things, or hitting or slapping, screaming, where there is complete loss of control. And again, I'm sure that at some point in our lives, we've all had experience with that kind of anger and that kind of expression of anger. But we know that that is damaging, because when the lashing out happens, it happens. Then after that, there is all of this damage that is done. And it's really difficult sometimes to come back from that. It's difficult to recover from not only the loss of control, but also the damage that is inflicted on the people around. The second way in which anger can be unhealthily expressed is passive aggression. Now, passive aggression is also aggression, except that it's done in a more covert way, in the sense that the person will not openly lash out. The person will not openly say things or openly maybe criticize or insult or things like that. But in passive ways, in covert ways, like maybe either through sarcasm or deliberately not doing certain things that the other person wants you to do, deliberately being difficult, deliberately trying to make things difficult for the other person without directly engaging, right? This can also be problematic because it really impacts, especially relationships. It really can impact relationships. So a lot of the times the other person, if it is a relationship and the other person is bearing the brunt of passive aggression, it can be very difficult for them, right? Because essentially passive aggression means that there is somewhere a breakdown in communication, right? But again, the anger is so overwhelming that it's difficult for that person to let go and have that open communication. The third is passive anger, right? This again can be dangerous and it can be harmful. And I say dangerous because what happens in this kind of anger is that the person withdraws, the person broods. So all of the anger is not allowed expression. Maybe it could be a scenario where, let's say it's a work setup and the person is not able to express it to, let's say, the senior or the boss. Now, what happens is then that the anger, and because the person has no way of expressing the anger gets bottled up. It gets locked up. Sometimes what can happen is that the anger can turn inwards. And when the anger turns inwards towards oneself, so that we now start to feel all of that anger towards ourselves, that can become difficult because it can become one of the contributory factors to depression, right? So passive anger is also a form of unhealthy expression of anger, and that can also be harmful in the long run. Sometimes anger, which is expressed unhealthily, is manifested as misdirected anger. What does that mean? That, let's say, again, and I'm taking that same workplace situation where I'm angry with my boss, or I'm angry with some senior person at work, but I can't express it there for whatever reasons. So then I come home and I take it out on people at home, right? Because I'm closer to them. And it's just easier, perhaps more convenient, to take it out on them. But any of us who has done this knows that in doing that, that also causes a lot of damage, right? Because the people at home then get affected. And not only that, at the end of, placing the anger on them, one is end up left feeling with that same sense of loss of control. And somewhere one knows that they are not at fault. The anger is about something else, right? So again, it is communication getting blocked. So all of these are examples of anger which is unhealthy. And this is the anger that we need to strive to work towards or manage. Right? The healthy anger is not the problem. So the goal, therefore, would be that if this is the anger that we're experiencing, how can we move from here to anger which is healthier, which allows us to take not aggressive or passive, but assertive action. Right? Okay, now I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the myths about anger. And I think these are very important because a lot of them are cultural. Right? So the first one is ignore it and it will go away. And this is a myth, right? Because ignoring an emotion very rarely pays off in the long run. In the short run, yes, we ignore it, we get on with things. But in the long run, and any of us who have had experience with this, we know that in the long run, that anger not only comes back, but it comes back with double the force because it has not been acknowledged, right? So this is in fact a myth that ignoring it will make it go away. It doesn't go away. Often the body stores that anger. And in the body storing that anger, there can be some kind of repercussions for the body as well, which means the physical health as well. Let it out and you'll feel better. So now this is the opposite, that you just let it all out. You basically lash out, you curse, you criticize, you abuse, and then you'll feel better. I think often what happens is the opposite, that when we let it all out, there is a feeling of loss of control. There is a feeling somewhere that we've caused damage which may be difficult to come back from. Right? So letting it all out is also not really a solution in the long run. And the myth that we'll feel better, maybe in the short term there might be some temporary relief that the anger is out, but not really when we look at the whole picture and we see the kind of damage that it has caused. If I'm not angry, others will walk all over me. And this is again an important myth to address. And it's very, very relevant, especially in our culture, right? Where we feel that I have to be angry and I have to show anger in order to get things done. What we often, the mistake that we often make here, and understandably so, because it's something that's generational, is that we mistake respect for fear. So we feel that if someone fears us, that they will then listen to us, right? And we equate that to respect. Respect is frankly a whole other thing altogether. Respect is really being about being respected for one's values, one's character, for what one represents, right? But we equate the two. We think that respect is fear. And what happens is that the cycle continues. So let's say there is this one incident where I have a reportee and I yell at the reportee. And I yell so that, the reportee will listen to me. So yes, the first time he might listen to you because he's scared. But number one, the fear is not very conducive to a healthy relationship in the long run. Number two, over time, it can become a habit so that every time I want the other person to get something done, I have to yell and I have to shout and I have to get angry and I have to become bigger than who I am, because that is the only way then that people will listen to me, right? And sadly, this can again be damaging for us in the long run. It can be damaging to the relationship as well in the long run. And then respect does not really come in. It's difficult to respect someone whom you fear, right? So respect and fear are really two different things. I can't help it. I'm an angry person. Often we put labels. We put labels on ourselves. We put labels on others. We say that, this person is always angry. She's an angry person. So what does it mean to call someone an angry person? If we call someone an angry person, what we're really saying is that all that the person is angry. There is no other emotion in that person. And is that really possible? Is that realistic? Can anybody be only angry all the time, past, present, and future? Because that is really what being an angry person means. So when we put that label on somebody that you're an angry person or I'm an angry person, we really invalidate all the other emotional experiences that we have, which is not just anger, but a lot of other emotions as well, like any human being, right? And then what happens with labels like these is that the moment we start putting labels, there is an element of trying to conform to that label. So if someone calls me an angry person, then I will also internalize the message that I'm an angry person. So no matter what, I'm an angry person, which means that this is something that cannot be changed, right? And that's a lot to put on somebody. Then this element comes in of, I can't help it, I'm an angry person. Now the label is there, now nothing can be done about it, right? It almost means as if there's no scope to change. It is other people and situations that make me unhealthily angry. And this is something I'm going to talk about more at length in the next few slides. But what are we really saying here? We are saying that it is people, situation, events that cause the unhealthy anger in me. And if we go back to a lot of philosophers of ancient times, Greek philosophers, and in the more recent decades, psychotherapists like Albert Ellis. Albert Ellis is started what is called REBT, which is Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. So a lot of therapeutic approaches also talk about the fact that it is not a person or a situation that causes unhealthy emotion in us. It is what we believe, what our attitude is about the person or about the situation that causes that unhealthy emotional disturbance in us. And I will talk a little bit about this more in detail. But what I would like to say here is that this in a way is liberating. Because what this means is that I do have some power. I do have some control. Not everything is determined by the people and the events in my life, right? There is some element of personal control that I can exercise in the way I view people or situations or events. Okay, so going back further into what anger really is. Anger is essentially an emotional consequence of often of three things. One is that there is a personal rule that has been broken. Okay, so let's say I am very, I strongly believe that signals on the road should not be broken. Okay, now somebody comes and breaks a signal right in front of my eyes. That's in a way a transgression of a personal rule. And so I might feel angry as a result of this. So that's one scenario when anger can come up. Second is a goal obstruction. So there's something that I really value and I'm trying to do and I'm trying to complete it. But for XYZ reasons, that's not happening. So the goal is getting frustrated. So there's a frustration of a goal or there's an obstruction of a goal for XYZ reasons. Maybe I want a promotion, I'm not getting a promotion because let's say, the boss has decided not to give me one for various reasons. There is an obstruction of a goal. And so anger could come up here as an emotion. The third is threat to self-esteem, right? Now this is when anger is actually masking another emotion. And what I mean by that is that sometimes we feel anger, but the anger is actually a cover for a deeper emotion. And very often that deeper emotion is shame. It could also be, guilt, envy, but often shame, right? And because we don't want to experience the shame, Because shame is not a difficult emotion. It's not an easy emotion to sit with. Shame is an extremely uncomfortable emotion to sit with. What does shame mean? Shame means that somewhere we are falling in the eyes of other people. And often, I'm sure all of us have experienced shame multiple times in our lives. And when we experience shame, there's almost a sense of feeling small, feeling inadequate, feeling less than. And so it sometimes can be difficult to sit with shame. So what happens then is that we convert the shame to anger. So if I'm feeling small and I'm therefore feeling shame, I convert that to anger and I direct that anger to somebody else and say, it's his fault. He is the problem. Right? Why? Because there is a threat to self-esteem. I'm feeling small. There's a threat to my sense of self. Right? So therefore, this kind of anger is called defensive anger, wherein the anger is actually a secondary emotion. It's hiding a deeper emotion, or it's covering up a deeper emotion, which is perhaps something like a shame. Okay. Now, when we experience anger, the question to ask ourselves is the anger healthy? And by healthy, I mean, is it manageable? Can I make sense of it? Will it allow me to function? Or is it unhealthy? Is it unmanageable? Is it completely dysfunctional? Am I feeling the need to lash out or be passive aggressive or be passive? And what we really want to do, like I said earlier, is to try and move towards healthy, manageable or functional life. Right? Now, how do we do this? Because it's easier said than done, right? It's not easy to move from a place of overwhelming rage and anger to moving towards a place of healthy anger. One of the things that can help is what we call cognitive restructuring. And this is nothing but elaborate phrase for changing our thought pattern, right? So cognitive, essentially changing our thought pattern, right? Now, how do we do this? Like I said, the first basic foundation of addressing or doing any kind of thought change or thought reframing is that we acknowledge that it is not an adversity that causes an unhealthy emotional disturbance, but it is our attitude or belief about that adversity. And I'd like to explain this through an example, right? Now, let's say that there is this person A, and I'm going to call this person A, and this person is stuck at a signal. And he is running late. He's trying to get to work. He's running late. And there's still a long way for the signal to turn green. Suddenly, there is this other person who just shoots past, right? Ignoring the fact that the signal is still red and shoots past. Now, person A gets extremely agitated. Okay, gets extremely agitated and gets extremely furious about this. So much so that he starts to, horn, keep beeping on the horn, and then he's punching fists on his steering wheel. But even that is not enough. So finally, when the signal turns green, he races ahead, gets to work, but he's still extremely furious. And invariably, that fury is unleashed on his reporters. Then he snaps at 10 other people in the course of the day, including his wife when he comes back home. And throughout the day, he's not really able to let it go, and he's not able to really function the way he would have liked. Okay, so this is person A's story. Now let's take a person B. Okay, person B, let's assume, is of the same age as person A, same socioeconomic strata, working in the same company, reporting to the same boss, similar background, similar cultural value system. So he's also not really okay with signals being broken. He's about the rules. The person B is also in the same situation. at the signal, okay, the signal still has some time to go before it turns green. There's that same person who comes and goes past, ignoring the signal. What happens to person B? Person B is angry. Okay, person B is like, what is this? The signal is very clearly red and this person just went past it. Right? Is there no respect for rules? So he has a bit of this rant in his car, and then the signal turns green. Person B goes ahead, gets to work, puts that aside, and then functions and is able to function fairly well. What is the difference between person A and person B? Because it's the same situation, the same background, same cultural beliefs, or rather value system, but what was different? If you all can type it in the chat, that'll be great. But there is one thing that is different and which really determines what person A is feeling and what person B is feeling. So firstly, what is person A feeling? Person A is feeling unhealthy anger, right? Because we saw the lashing out. We saw the dysfunctionality of it. What is person B feeling? Anger, no doubt. But it's healthy anger because this person is still able to make some sense of it and then go on and go ahead and go about his work. So it really then comes down to the attitude. Person A has held a certain attitude or a certain belief about what happened. Person B held a different attitude or belief about what happened. And that determined whether what they experienced was healthy anger or unhealthy anger. So let's try to understand what were the attitudes. What was person A thinking? Person A started with thinking that I want this man not to break the signal, which is valid. It's a very valid want. Who amongst us likes it? I mean, a lot of us are uncomfortable about someone else just shooting past the signal, right? But he is not stopping here at the want. The want is valid. I want the man to not break the signal. But what is happening is that on top of the want, he's adding a demand. So he's saying, I want the man to behave in a certain way. And so he absolutely must behave that way. So he's making a very, very rigid demand that the other person must not break the signal, no matter what. Okay. Now the question here is, yes, the want is valid. You want him to behave in a certain way. But is the demand valid? And just because you want him to behave in a certain way, sadly, does it follow that therefore he must behave in that way? What about, let's look at the person who broke the signal. He is an individual. He has free will. Can anyone really control his habits, or can anyone really control his actions? Not really. At least certainly not in that scenario. We don't know what happened that day, why he broke the signal. We don't know, right? But he's an individual who has free will and he can exercise that free will, unfortunately. So by making a demand that he should absolutely not, are we being realistic? It's a bit like saying, I want money and therefore I absolutely must have money. But how? How will money just come like that because I make a demand? Right? So the preference is valid that, yeah, I want money. But making that demand of it is what leads to the unhealthy act. Now, what is person B thinking? Person B has a bit more flexible belief. What is person B saying? Person B is saying, I want him to behave in a certain way. So person B is also saying the same thing, that I don't want him to break the signal. But person B acknowledges that sadly, it does not follow that therefore he must behave in the way that I want. Now, which of these two beliefs is more consistent with our reality? People are going to behave the way they want to finally. Are saying no, they must behave in a certain way, is that really going to change other people's behavior? It may sometimes, but not always, because they are independent human beings with their own free will, right? So we placing the demand is only increasing our blood pressure. Now, the other thing, the other beliefs that can cause unhealthy anger versus healthy anger is what we call labeling. Now, what person A what was additionally saying that, this man is useless. So if he does not do what I want him to do, that means he is useless. Now, let's think about the person who broke the signal. Okay. The moment we call someone useless, it means that it's a global rating. It's a global evaluation. It means that they're useless in everything that they do, past, present, and future. No matter what they do, they're useless. Is that realistic? Is that a realistic evaluation of that person who broke the signal? We don't know. Maybe there are some things that the person has done which are not okay, but then equally there may be a lot of things that the person has done which are, right? And in putting that label, we are basically discounting that person's reality for that day. So for example, we don't know why he broke the signal. There could be many reasons. One maybe is just the sort of person who often breaks signals. Okay, maybe that is one scenario. Could also be that that person was in some really crazy emergency. There was some life or death situation, or did not realize, or just was speeding, and any number of things. We don't know. But calling the full person as useless only further increases the unhealthy anger. Right? What did person B think about this person? Person B said, I don't like the way he's behaving. I don't like what he's done. But that doesn't mean that he as a whole is useless. I don't know him. Right? So it's just a thought that, the next time we call someone or we give someone a whole global rating, he is useless, or even give ourselves that global rating, is something to think about. That is the whole person, and is everything that the person does like that. And then the third thing, what we call discomfort intolerance, right? Which can also cause unhealthy anger, which basically says that where person A is saying that I want him to behave in a certain way, and he absolutely must, and he's useless if he hasn't. And I cannot stand him behaving like this. I cannot stand it. Right? What does I cannot stand it mean? When we say I cannot stand something, it pretty much means that I cannot bear it. Right? And if we were to realistically evaluate that sentence, it means that I should disintegrate right here because I cannot bear it. I cannot stand it. Right? Is that really realistic? Isn't that a little extreme? What is person A saying? Person A is saying that, this man has behaved in a certain way and it's not easy. It is hard. It's very hard. But I can stand it because it is worth it for me. So you see, it's not just tolerating it passively. Person B is not putting up with it or tolerating it passively. Person B is making an active choice that I can stand it because it's worth it for me, because I have a whole day's work ahead of me. I have all of these things to do. I don't want to take out my anger on 10 people. So yes, this is very uncomfortable for me to sit with the fact that somebody just broke the signal, but I can bear it. I can look at it. I can acknowledge it. I can acknowledge that I'm feeling angry, but I can bear it because it is worth it for me. So there's a difference here. You see, the second one is more in the place of responding, whereas the first is more in the place of reacting impulsively. Right? Now, the second scenario that I mentioned, the earlier scenario that I talked about, was when someone is breaking some kind of a rule or there is a goal which is getting obstructed. Unhealthy anger, like I said, can also happen when there is a threat to self-esteem. And this is usually when, like I had said earlier, that there is a deeper emotion, maybe shame, that is so difficult to sit with that we quickly convert it to anger. And this is quite common because sadly in our society, anger is much more culturally acceptable as an emotion. And especially if you look at the cultural context, then there is a sort of a gender element that plays in there as well. And that anger is seen as a sign of strength and so on. So some of us quite intuitively very quickly convert the shame to anger. So instead of acknowledging that we are feeling small, we try to put the other person down by getting angry and directing our anger at the other person. Now that's also a problem, and that's also a kind of unhealthy anger. So what are some of the rigid beliefs here that can cause unhealthy anger? And especially in the parental context, right? It could be that my child, or let's say my family member, must behave in a certain way. Otherwise, I will feel small. Or otherwise, I fall in the eyes of others. Now, what happens here? And I'll bring this alive through an example. Let's say we have a family member and we want the family member to talk politely or say certain things when guests arrive. Okay. Now, for whatever reason, that family member does not do that. Okay. Now we get angry. But what is really at the root of the anger? And I'm not saying that this applies to all such situations, but in this particular scenario, what could potentially be happening is that the person is actually feeling shame that my family member did not behave in this in a certain way in front of the guests. So now I am feeling small. Now I feel as if my self-esteem is at stake. What will they be thinking about me? I have probably fallen in their eyes. That's shame. And it's not an easy emotion to sit with. But then what happens? That shame gets converted to anger. And then we start to get angry at the family member. How could you behave like that? Right? But what is the demand that we are making of that family member? We are saying not only that I want the family member to behave in a certain way in front of guests, we are adding on the demand that therefore he or she or they must. Now again, that family member is a person, an independent human being, when all said and done, has free will. And maybe there are times when they listen to you, maybe there are times when they don't. Sadly, by placing that demand that they must at all times, and especially when guests are there, behave in a certain way, it only makes it more difficult for us because we are left holding unhealthy anger, which is actually a cover up for shame. Right? And the shame also can be addressed. The shame also can be addressed because if we really look at it as if we want to replace these beliefs with, say, yes, I want my family member to behave in a certain way, but sadly, it doesn't follow that he must. I mean, I wish he did, but doesn't follow that he must. And it's so I'm not going to fall in front of their eyes. Maybe they may have thought something in that moment, but it doesn't lessen my self-worth or my self-esteem. Then that shame can again become manageable. Okay. So it then comes down to trying to understand what is the belief that we are holding about the situation or about the person. If I'm angry at someone, what is the belief I'm holding? What is the demand I'm making? Yeah. What am I saying about that whole situation? And is that realistic? Is it rigid? The more rigid the belief, and rigid usually means that there is a must, there is a should. The more rigid the belief, the more likely there will be of unhealthy disturbance. Right? So we are basically then disturbing ourselves with that rigid. And then can we then replace that with something which is more flexible and more realistic? We may still feel angry, but at least it's anger that is manageable and it's healthier and it's something that is still functional. Right? So like I said, the goal is not the elimination. The goal is to manage and to bring it to a healthier place. Right? Now,
I would just like to interrupt you here, Sarika, because I think the point that you just discussed is very relevant for us as parents.
right,
Because our children with autism, okay, they display a lot of socially unacceptable behaviors. Like a lot of them would engage in self-stimulatory behaviors, or a lot of them would show outbursts of emotion because of a meltdown.
right,
And ironically, we parents, in order to, if a child is exhibiting a temper tantrum or a meltdown, okay, that is his way of expressing his emotions. But we, as parents, instead of controlling it, we tend to respond very aggressively or with anger. So
right.
I think the point which you discussed was very relevant. And in your discussion, I would like to even use this example of how you would give cognitive restructuring in terms of this situation to parents.
Right. Thank you, Samriddhi, for that. And let me elaborate a little bit or carry forward the example that you brought up, which is extremely relevant. So it again comes down to the same thing that my son or my daughter, now let's say, for example, if there is some kind of stimulatory behavior that's happening and in front of certain people or maybe in front of friends, and that for us becomes an extension of ourselves almost. Right? So we feel the shame because we feel that now in our son or our daughter displaying that behavior, that is somehow an attack on our sense of self. Right? But again, there are two things to understand here. One is, as we all know, that it is a function of the condition. With autism, sometimes there can be difficulty in really being fully aware of one's surroundings, right? So that condition is a very, very real condition. Now, if we were to say that, no, he absolutely should not do this, or she absolutely should not do this, right? And if she does, or if he does, then I fall in the eyes of others. Not only am I feeling shame, which is again very unmanageable, I'm also experiencing a lot of unhealthy anger, probably towards the people who have come, or even maybe towards my own child. Now, what if I were to reframe that differently? What if I were to say that, no, I'm not very comfortable with him doing this, right? Ideally, I would like it if my son or daughter didn't do it. But that doesn't mean that he should not, because this is his condition. This is his reality. And it does not mean that I am a lesser person because of it, or that he is a lesser person because of it. You see, it is simply the condition. It is simply the autism, right? And that internalizing that belief takes some time. It takes some practice. It also takes some amount of dialogue with the more rigid belief that he must not, because I'm uncomfortable and I cannot stand it, he must not, right? So allowing ourselves to sit with the discomfort is the other point here, which is that yes, it is happening. And yes, it's something which I may feel uncomfortable about. But can I sit with that? Am I saying I cannot stand it? Or am I saying that it's difficult, but I can stand it, I can bear it because it is worth it for me and it is worth it for my child? Because otherwise, then what I'm moving towards is unhealthy anger, where Samriddhi, as you said, there will be aggression, there may be a lot of yelling and shouting at the child, and which could further compound the whole situation. So instead of finding a solution, we are now moving towards fixing blame. So instead of fixing a certain, or rather trying to address a certain situation, we are now then moving towards fixing blame, lashing out, and the aggression. So thank you, Samriddhi, for raising that. Let's also talk a little bit about anxiety. And I think anxiety also is something that a lot of us have grappled with, especially in the current times. And many of, a lot of you have children who are now at home as a result of the lockdown. And it's been that situation for the last 1.5 years. So it's not been easy at all. Many of you are working and then handling work, handling all of this at home also becomes difficult. Right? So stress, understandably, has been a regular feature in a lot of homes. But can we look at the anxiety? And again, can we see if we can manage it in a way that it is functional? So let's look at some ways in which we can do that. And again, it may not always be easy, but can we at least try to move towards that? Right? Now, a lot of the times we get angry, but actually what we really are is anxious. It's just that the anxiety is coming out as anger. Because often one of the symptoms of anxiety is irritability, where you're snapping at everyone, you're getting irritated with everyone at home. And lockdown with everyone at home all the time, I'm sure many of us have snapped at members in the house, snapped at our children. In some way, it's almost like a release for the anxiety, right? So unhealthy anxiety, and again, anxiety also, there is an unhealthy kind and there is a healthy kind. Unhealthy anxiety can manifest as anger. But if we are to manage anxiety, the first step is to try to understand what it is. Right? What is anxiety? If I were to very simply explain anxiety, it means I'm overestimating a threat and I'm underestimating my own ability to deal with that threat. So both of these two things happen simultaneously with anxiety, right? But you overestimate the threat or the problem and you underestimate your own resources to deal with that problem. Right? And no wonder then a person gets weighed down by anxiety. And often anxiety, the way it manifests is changes in sleep. So either too little sleep or too much sleep, changes in appetite, not feeling like eating enough, or maybe overeating, stress eating as we call it. A lot of ruminating, a lot of worrying, where we're thinking about our problems the whole time and spending a lot of time going around in circles thinking about our problem. Inability to focus, concentrate, irritability, and so on. Right? So these are some of the ways in which unhealthy anxiety manifests. Now, just as with anger, there's unhealthy anger, and then there is the healthy anger. So with anxiety also, if we were to look at healthy anxiety, if there is such a thing, what would that look like? And I won't call it healthy anxiety. I'll actually give another name to it. And let's call it concern. You see, concern is very qualitatively different from feeling anxious. How? To be concerned means that, yes, this is something that I am a little concerned about. I may be very concerned about it, but I'm also trying to do whatever is in my control and then leaving the rest. And I'm functioning. That's concern. Anxiety, on the other hand, is all of these things, where it's difficult to function. At the end of the day, it's difficult to function. Right? So usually we don't say a lot of anxiety and less anxiety, because either way is poison. But we say anxiety and then we say healthy concern. And what we want to move towards is healthy concern. Right? Now, let's look at healthy concern, and I'll again try and frame it in through an example. Okay. What is one of the most one of the things that we're all really craving for, especially in this last 1 year with COVID? We're all somewhere wanting certainty. We all somewhere want control. You know, when we look at our children and they're still at home, they're not going to school, they're not interacting with other kids. Some of them may be playing video games a lot, and that is also a source of anxiety for a lot. Right? Somewhere there is this thought, and when is this going to end? I want to know, when is this going to end? I want that certainty. Right? There are some of us who may have lost jobs. And then there is this thought that, when am I going to get a job? I want that certainty. Because if there's one thing we've all experienced through the pandemic, somewhere it is a loss of safety. Whatever our internal sense of safety was, we've lost that to some extent. Certainty and control. Not that we ever always had complete control over all the things that happened in our life, but more than ever, the pandemic has really hit us with the fact that we don't have control over a lot of things. And that's very, very difficult to stay with. At the root of anxiety is not only wanting certainty and control, but demanding it. Because for human beings in general, it is difficult to stay with uncertainty. Right? It's quite natural. We all want certainty. Either way, ho raha hai ya nahi ho raha hai, is it happening or not happening? We want to stay in the binary. This middle ground, it may or may not, is very, very difficult for us to sit in. Right? And so we make the demand that I have to have that certainty. But what has COVID told us? What has COVID taught us? That we don't have that certainty. So I can sit here today and I can shout and scream at the top of my voice saying that I want the certainty and I must have the certainty. But is that going to happen just because I say or I demand? Sadly, who am I in the larger scheme of things? Right. Then this other belief that we put on top of it, that if I don't have the certainty, I cannot stand it. No wonder we feel anxious. Because what we are saying is that I just absolutely cannot bear the uncertainty. It is hard. It is hard for all of us in different ways. But when we add on to that I cannot stand it at all, we are further, in a way, adding on and creating more of that anxiety. If we were to instead say, and again, it's not easy to just move from this thought to the healthier thought, but with time, with practice, if we were to come to a place, and with some amount of internal dialogue, if we were to come to a place where we say that, you know, I don't have certainty of when schools are going to start. And it is very, very hard. It's extremely difficult. I'm going through all of these things. But I can still bear it Because it's in my best interest. Because by making the demand that I must have the certainty and telling myself that I cannot stand it, I am only further disturbing myself. The situation that I'm in is bad enough. Do I want to further add on to that badness with disturbance? It is not only bad, it's awful. This is what we call awfulizing. Right? So it's not only bad that my child is now constantly playing video games. It is awful. It's the worst thing in the world. The moment we say it's the worst thing in the world, the moment we go to a place of awful, what does awful mean? Worst thing, awful. It means it cannot be recovered from. It's become so bad that there is no hope of coming back. And so how can we stay with the badness without making it awful? Not easy. None of this is easy. Moving from here to the more flexible release is not easy. But can we make that start? One situation at a time. One of the things, these are a few things which have been helpful to some. And what I would say is that see if it makes sense for you all, and you all can take away if it makes take away and use it if it makes sense for you all. Otherwise, you can leave it here. The first is this: making a distinction between certainty and probability. Now, let's take the scenario of my child. Okay, my child is never going to be able to have a functioning life. Okay, what is this? The moment we say, and then obviously we have that thought and we feel very anxious. My child is never going to have a functioning life or a good life, right? If we have that thought, let's say, we have in a way made it a certainty because we've said it's never going to happen. Now, as a result of this thought, obviously there's going to be a lot of anxiety. There's going to be a lot of worrying. There's going to be a lot of ruminating. Because I have taken it as a certainty, because human beings love certainty. So we also move towards the other end, right? We move towards the worst case scenario and we say that it's never going to happen. He's never or she's never going to have the kind of life that I want for him or her, or never going to have, a functioning kind of a life. Now, in such a situation, and it's hard, right? But in such a situation, when we have these thoughts, can we make a distinction between certainty and probability? Because certainty is 100% my child is not going to. Probability, maybe 50%. Maybe even lesser. Okay, we don't know. But when we look at that probability, there is some sense of liberation there because it is not a certainty. It's not 100% worst case scenario. There is a probability here, and probability means that I therefore have some power, some control over the situation. It's actually liberating. And then it comes down to this: what is in my control, what is not in my control? What can I do in my control to further reduce the probability? Right. The same with, let's say, if there has been an example of, say, losing a job or losing a source of income in these difficult times, right? Maybe the first thought that comes to our head immediately is, I'm never going to get a job, or I'm never going to get a job quickly, Okay, so that is never getting a job quickly means 100% certainty. Can we move from that certainty to probability? What is the probability? Okay, let's say it's 80%. Fine, it's 80%, which means it is not 100%. Now, can I further bring that 80% from 80% to 70% by doing whatever is in my control? So there is some sense of control. And the moment there is some sense of control, we're immediately moving from unhealthy anxiety, which is dysfunctional, to a more healthy concern.
Yes, Sarika, I wanted to ask you. So here, when you encounter a client, okay, experiencing anxiety, using this strategy, are you trying to quantify the problem? Is that a strategy wherein you give a certain, quantification to the problem so that it becomes easier for the client to imagine it? And I would also like you to talk about if you use any metaphors, or is this done through engaging in conversation, or you use any kind of imagery, in order to practice this.
Right. So I think one of the ways in which we try to bring this point alive is usually with anxiety, there is a gravitation towards worst case scenario, right? Because anxiety by definition means that you're overestimating the threat, right? So immediately the mind moves to a place of worst case scenario. One strategy around this is that what is the worst case scenario? Okay, that never getting a job. What is the best case scenario? I'm getting a job today. Once I have both these points or these anchors, the third question is, what is the most realistic scenario? And the moment we come to realistic, the moment I ask myself that question after looking at worst case scenario, best case scenario, what is the more realistic scenario? Realistic scenario is really the probability that maybe 80% I might not get it, but I think 20% I may get it, or it could be the other way around. Now, the moment I come to a realistic scenario is the moment where I can start doing something. You see, and that is the place where we want to be. Where I'm not overwhelmed by the anger. I'm not just staying with the worst case scenario, and nor am I being foolishly optimistic and looking at only the best case scenario. So, we often think positive thoughts. The idea is not to keep thinking positive thoughts. The idea is to think realistic thoughts. Okay, so we don't want to be foolishly optimistic and say, today itself I'll get a job, because then we're not going to do anything. Nor do we want to be in that worst case scenario place where there's certainty that 100% nothing is going to happen. We want to come somewhere in the middle, which is also often the more realistic place. Right? I hope that answers your question, Samriddhi. But this is a strategy that sometimes helps to think of the worst case, think of the best case, and then come to the middle.
Okay, thank you so much. Because when we work with our children in terms of managing anger, we also do use a visually of things which are in my control and things which are not in my control.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you for adding on to that. Yeah.
Right. And that's right, Samriddhi, in the sense that sometimes drawing that circle, right, which is what is in my control. So you draw that one circle. You draw a circle outside, which is what is out of my control. And there may be a lot of things that are sitting in the outer circle, but there may be those 3 or 4 things that are sitting in the inner circle, which are in my control. And then the idea is, can I stay with that and work with that? And the rest, that's fine. Let it remain in the outer circle. Right? So yes, that is also something that we do use sometimes. Now, the second thing that sometimes helps is to take a step back, and especially with anxiety, when there's a lot of ruminating, there's a lot of worrying happening. right? So there are all of these thoughts going on. And one can very easily get caught up in those thoughts. Right? I will talk about some strategies for dealing with that in a bit, but let me first deal with the cognitive part of it. So when all of these thoughts are going on, one thing that can help is taking a step back and just observing those thoughts. Because not every thought is true. What happens with anxiety is that our mind is constantly throwing the worst case thoughts at us. And often those thoughts are not true. So it helps just to tell ourselves that not every thought is true. We can later decide, is this thought really true? Is it realistic? Is it not? But we can start with saying that not every thought is true. I don't have to pay attention to every thought that comes, to every message of doom that comes. Not every thought is true. So you see that there is a cultural context, there is an evolutionary context to this. Again, when human beings were hunter-gatherers, it was important to have some kind of a warning signal, a way that our brain could alert us to any kind of threat. Right? And in those days that helped. But today, what is happening is that we end up sometimes seeing threat even when it's not really there. So in the olden times, there's a tiger, then yes, the threat, there would immediately be this signal that would go, which would tell us there is a threat. And it is a real threat. There is a tiger there. Today, there are no tigers around, right? But the brain is still telling us constantly that this is a threat, that is a threat, and not everything is necessarily a threat, right? So being able to step back a little from your thoughts and say that not every thought is true, right? That can also help sometimes to just create a little bit of distance from thoughts. The other thing that can help, and again, this is all with respect to dealing with uncertainty. And the other thing that can help is, have I survived a situation that has involved uncertainty in the past? Because I'm sure all of us have at different points in our lives. In fact, now when we deal with this lockdown, we have last year as a reference point, right? And then we have our own experiences in the past where we dealt with loss and uncertainty. What did we tell ourselves then to get through? What did we say to ourselves? Did all the things that we fear happen? What were the things that did happen and what didn't? And if they did happen, did I deal with them? Was I able to deal with them? It may not have been easy, but was I able to deal with them in some way or the other? Right? Because we're all still here. And much as we may say that I cannot stand it, we're all still here. We haven't fallen apart in a physical sense. We haven't disintegrated in a physical sense. Yes, we have the wounds of it. We're carrying the scars and the wounds of it, but we haven't completely disintegrated. I'd like to spend a little bit of time on perfectionism as well, which is often a very huge source of unhealthy anxiety. And especially in today's world where there's such a demand for perfection everywhere, right? And we want perfection in some form or the other, sometimes in our children as well. We want the perfection in us, we want it in our children. And that then becomes a source of huge anxiety. And often what happens is that as parents, we really bear the brunt of this. So any mistake that we make, we automatically go to a place of, I'm a bad parent. Right? All of us are learning here, right? I mean, to have children who have autism as a condition is not easy. It's not as if, this is something that we were all trained to do, or that we've had training in as we grew up. We don't. Right? It's difficult. We're all learning and navigating as we can. But sometimes there is that ingrained wiring in us that I have to be a perfect parent, which means I'm not allowed to make any mistakes. And if I'm not a perfect parent, then I'm not good enough. I'm a bad parent, I'm without worth. This can happen. This is very common. And with this kind of a demand that I have to be perfect, I have to be a good parent, whatever good is, at all times. And if I'm not that, then I'm a horrible parent. I'm without worth. I'm not good enough. That's very, very, very hard. That's us being very hard on ourselves. The one thing that I often say is that we're human beings first. Parents, professionals, etc., everything, second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th, 99th. Right? And it's inhuman to expect that we don't make mistakes. Yes, some of those mistakes may have costs. But can we recover from those? Right? Because when we say that I must be a perfect parent, it means that I'm not allowed to make any mistakes. And then no wonder there is so much anxiety about any task. I had this one client who had this belief that, I have to be a perfect parent. Not only do I want to be, but I must be a perfect parent. And there was this one mistake that happened. There was a certain consequence to it. But as a result of that, she was fully labeling herself as a bad parent. And all of us do that. We have that tendency somewhere. Many of us have that tendency to do that. And, it's a bit like a basket of fruits. You have 6 fruits which are really good, in good condition. And then you have 2 fruits which have gone bad. Now, do you label the whole basket as horrible or bad? Or do you say that, yeah, okay, there are some good fruits here, or rather there are some fruits which I can eat, and then there are 1 or 2 fruits which are not, which are rotten. We label the whole person and sometimes ourselves as perfect or nothing, right? And therein lies a lot of stress. And again, it's not easy to start to come to a place where we can say, I want to be a good parent. And I'm going to try to do my best, but it's not possible for me to get everything right all the time. I'm going to make mistakes. And the acceptance of this, that I'm going to make mistakes, is going to happen. But can I be good enough instead of trying to achieve a perfection? Can I be good enough? Somewhere in the middle, good enough. But I'm getting some things right, maybe some things not. Okay. Now, this was more in the cognitive space, but let's also look at some other strategies to deal with anger and anxiety. The first, and I would actually look at these as steps, right? So let's say I'm in a situation and right now I'm experiencing some anger, okay? And I recognize that it is anger. I think the first step is to really be able to acknowledge to ourselves that, yes, what I'm feeling is anger. Sometimes in just naming the emotion, we can then manage it. If we are not able to name something, how do we manage it? So the first step really begins with whatever situation you're in. If you're experiencing that discomfort, can we take a second to just turn inward and say, what am I feeling right now? Is it anger? Is it anxiety? Okay, so I'm feeling anger. And that is really the starting point. Noticing something, naming something often takes away a little bit of power from that emotion. right? And this is the first step to managing. Now, let's say I often have arguments with my child at night, okay, and I become very agitated because night is also the time when obviously I'm tired. I just had a long day of work and other responsibilities, and then also my child parenting, and invariably my child is playing video games, let's say. Now at night, if I pick up that discussion with him or her, I'm going to get even more angry and agitated because as it is, I'm tired, right? So I'm not in the frame of mind to now start doing cognitive, changing my thoughts and all of that. I'm too tired to do all that, right? This is a common scenario. So if I know that nighttime is not a good time, then can I leave it for them and maybe have that discussion in the morning? So that is, it's basically trying to say, what are my triggers? What really bothers me? So if nighttime is when I'm really tired, or at a certain time of the day I'm very hungry, and then when all of these other things are happening, then it's hungry and anger and it's hangry, and then it's hell breaking loose. Then can I identify that these certain times in the day when I'm not at my optimum, and I don't want to then indulge in any kind of discussion or fight or argument at those times? That's one, right? So identifying what the triggers are. But this is not always possible to do, but it's basically trying to change the event or change the situation. Now, for example, workplace, not happy in my work. The obvious solution, most people would say, okay, then change your workplace. But it's not always easy to do, right? So this is something that doesn't always work, but some bit of trying to recognize what our own triggers are can help, right? So for example, I am not a morning person. Okay, so I can't have very intense conversations in the morning. So then I won't. I don't want to do all of the heavy thinking in the morning. I'll do it later in the day. So these simple triggers sometimes can help. But like I said, the starting point really is recognizing that I'm feeling a certain emotion and then being able to name it and notice it. Now, with anger, let's say I'm in a situation where I'm having an argument with my child. Okay. And I'm starting to feel the anger. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm saying, yes, I'm beginning to feel angry. Okay. How do I know? And can we start to recognize the signs? Blood is beginning to kind of get heated. My heartbeat is rising, is escalating. I'm feeling that my cheeks are becoming red, like I'm feeling flushed. I'm sweating. All of these are ways in which the body is trying to tell us that, okay, now you're getting into a place where the anger is going to come out if certain steps are not taken. So can we start to recognize those? And I'll take it one point at a time. The moment we are able to recognize that, okay, now I'm getting to that place, can we, at that point, decide to take time out? And this is, again, not something that can just happen like that. It does take some practice. But the moment I'm able to recognize that, yes, now I'm feeling angry and now all of this is happening, I need to get out of here, because otherwise I'm going to lash out, I'm going to hit, I'm going to get aggressive, I'm going to do all sorts of things which are ultimately not going to be helpful in the long. So can I take some time? And one way of taking time out is to say, I'm angry right now. I can't do this right now because I may say things that might regret. So let's have this conversation later. And this is something that can help even when having an argument with children. It can be done even when having arguments with spouses or whoever else is there at home. Right? That right now I'm angry. I need some time. The trick here is in recognizing when to take that time out. Very often it becomes too late. Very often it all comes out and then we are like, oh no. So can we start to turn inwards and check in with our body as to what's happening? Right? A lot of us, we get so disconnected with our own bodies. And this is where, connecting with our body from time to time, every now and again during the day, checking in and saying, okay, how am I feeling right now? What am I feeling right now? Getting into the practice of that helps, because we are so outward focused throughout the day. We don't realize what is happening in our body. And then no wonder a lot of us have psychosomatic illnesses. We have headaches, migraines, stomach upset, and acidity. A lot of these have some relation with emotions that have not been fully processed. Right? So checking in with our body from time to time. What am I feeling right now? Where am I feeling it in my body? What's going on inside? And then coming back to the present. And then once I've separated myself from that situation, using those first 5-10 minutes or 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever, to distract myself temporarily so that I am back to being emotionally regulated, so that my heartbeat is now back to normal. So there are several ways in which one can temporarily regulate temporarily do things to regulate oneself. Right? So it could be just the act of stepping away, drinking water, or listening to some song, or just watching something on YouTube. Yeah, something, any of these things, because temporarily you want your body physically to get out of that place of being hyper aroused. Okay. And another way in which you can regulate in that time, so you have those 15-20 minutes, or maybe you have an hour, whatever little time you have, is trying some relaxation. Now, different things work for different people. For some, just drinking water helps. For some, they have to do an elaborate breathing ritual to find some balance. Right? For some, it's maybe YouTube. So each of us have different ways, but all of these are available to us. We may choose what we want to do. Okay. I'll talk a little bit about relaxation, especially to regulate ourselves in that time. Okay. One technique which I have personally found helpful, and maybe some of you have already tried this, is what is called 4-2-3-2 breathing. So it basically goes like this: breathing in 1, 2, 3, 4, hold 1, 2, breathe out 1, 2, 3, hold 1, 2, and then repeating that. So 4, 2, 3, 2. The reason the out breath 3 is 3, so it's shorter than the in breath, is for the brain to the thinking part of the brain to kick in, right? Because the moment it's 4, 2, then 3, 2, then your brain has to start to get into the thinking mode. Because when we are immediately angry, the thinking part of the brain shuts down. So what we want to try to do with this relaxation is to start to bring back the thinking mode. We can't do framing and thought framing and all of that when we are at that level of anger. So we need to go through these things first before we get there. Right? So just this 4-2-3-2 can sometimes bring back or activate the thinking mode. For some, diaphragmatic breathing, deep breathing works. Now, when we are very angry, we start to breathe from the chest. Right? I think some of you may be familiar with this. Diaphragmatic deep breathing is when we breathe from the stomach. So if I were to place one hand on my chest, the other on my stomach, if I'm taking a deep breath, my stomach goes out. And as I release the breath, my stomach goes in. The chest remains steady. So this hand is not going up and down, but the hand on my stomach is going up. That's diaphragmatic breathing. It can also help to bring back the thinking part of the brain. Imagery helps. Visualizing a relaxing experience, or a relaxing place. For those of you who have good imaginations, this can help. Grounding. Grounding is another interesting and very useful technique, and especially at any time when we are very highly agitated, when the thinking part of the brain has shut down completely, grounding can really help. What does grounding do? What is the idea of grounding? Grounding, it basically helps you to come back to the present moment. Right? One is in a state of extreme agitation. Maybe one has completely gotten caught up in thoughts. And there's this whole cycle of thoughts happening. One way to step out of that and to come back to the present moment is grounding. So how do we do grounding? And I'll share a more abbreviated version, but it's often a longer process. But one way is very quickly, if one were to do that, then the idea is to engage all the senses, right? So one can start with first slowly looking around and identifying 5 things, 5 objects, any 5 objects, identifying them and naming them. So for example, as I go from left to right, I see a cup, I see a bottle, I see a lamp, I see a cupboard, and I see a door. So 5 things or objects that you can name, right? So you're using your eyes, you're using your sight. And then 3 things close to you that you can touch. So let's say you pick up a paper and you touch it and you see what that feels like. Is it soft, hard? Is it cold, warm? What's the texture of the light? What's the texture? How is the light falling on it? Let go of that object, pick another object close to you, do the same thing. Touch it, see how it feels. Pick up a third object, do the same thing. And then one thing that you can smell. So again, pick up anything that is close to you and smell it. And again, start to think about how it smells. So 5 things to see and name, 3 things to touch, and 1 thing to smell. This basically then pulls you out of whatever space you're in back into the present. And it reactivates the thinking part of the brain. So this is something that ideally helps if one is practicing it on a regular basis, so that when one is agitated, automatically we learn to do this or to use this technique. Now, once all that has happened, once I'm in a place where, okay, now I am being able to think, then I can do the thought reframing or the cognitive restructuring that we talked about. Right? Then I can still try and understand what exactly is going on. Right? So some of the questions are, is it anger? Is it anxiety? Is it shame? What exactly am I feeling? Okay. Is the anger just anger, or is it covering up some other emotion? If it is anger or if it's anxiety, is it healthy or is it unhealthy? Am I feeling like it's too much? Or is it something that I can manage? If it is unhealthy, then what am I really saying? What is the demand that I'm making from this situation or this person? Am I awfulizing something? Am I saying I cannot stand something? What is really going on? And then if I'm saying something like, I have to be a perfect parent, I must be a perfect parent, otherwise I'm a horrible parent, then let me look at that. Is that really true? Firstly, why must I be the perfect parent at all times? I may want to be, but does it mean I have to be the perfect parent at all times? Is that even possible? Am I not allowed to make mistakes? Is everything that I do so bad that I'm in totality a bad parent? right? So these are then some of the conversations one can have with oneself when one is in that framework. Similarly, with your child, oh, he's not behaving in the way I want him to. It's so frustrating. But is it fair to make that demand? How is it helping me? How is it helping my child? Can I bear it because it's worth it? Is it really his fault? Is it really my fault? Whose fault is it? Maybe it's no one's fault. So, starting to have that dialogue. Can I give up the demand that he has to behave in a certain way? I don't want him to, but can I give up the demand because the demand is only making it worse? Now, let's say one decides that I am angry about something. Somebody has crossed a line. Okay. Let's say there is something that your child has done which is not okay. Right. Now, there are two ways to approach it. I can yell, shout, scream, or I can process the anger and I can tell him or her that this is not okay. And can we look at another way of dealing with this? It could be your child, it could be your spouse, whatever, whoever. And what is the healthy way of expressing? Okay. So, firstly, healthy expression means to be able to be assertive without being aggressive. And typically, it means if I want to express something healthily, then the one format which has known to be quite helpful is sticking to the I statements. So the format is like this. You describe the situation, you describe how you're feeling, and you describe what you need. At no point do you say you are the problem, you are this, you do that, you do it like this only. Think about the last time someone said that to us, and you are like this, you do this only, you do that only. It makes us we feel defensive. When we feel defensive, we don't want to listen to the other person. But if the other person were to say, you know, when this happened, so when the guests had come, and this is what happened, I felt really sad. And what I need is that. And what I need is for you to do this. Again, this is when in situations when something can be done about it, right? Or let's say, your spouse has not, I'll give a personal example, maybe dog walking, right? So let's say if my spouse has not taken the dog out for a walk that day. And if I say that, or let's say I have not taken the dog out for a walk. Now, if my spouse says to me, when the dog was not taken out for a walk this morning, I felt really upset because I felt that the responsibility was on me. I felt burdened. What I need is for you to do this. So this can sometimes help because it comes from a place of what you need and what you feel and not criticizing the other person. Setting boundaries. I'm going to quickly go through this, that very often we really struggle to set boundaries. We often struggle to say no, and especially in our culture, saying no almost means being disrespectful. But sometimes saying no can be a good thing. I know one parent where the mother said that 20 minutes after I come back from home, come back from work, nobody should disturb me. Those 20 minutes are mine. And I'm allowed to say no and to whoever comes. And it took a lot of time to set that system into place. But those 20 minutes she owns. It's her time. Because if we don't set boundaries sometimes, then the resentment builds up. If we're not able to say no sometimes, the resentment builds up. And here again, we're so worried. So-and-so will feel offended. I will disappoint this person. I will feel guilty. And we also say, I won't be able to tolerate. I can't stand that. I can't stand feeling guilty. I can't stand the other person being offended. but the cost is our own personal health. So can we then say that I can stand their being offended because it is worth it for me? I need this time. Self-care, and especially for all caregivers, anger, anxiety often is an outcome of burnout because you're so constantly overdrawn. There's so much that you're doing, right? And so caregiving, in a way, it's rewarding, but it can also be very, very challenging. It can be very exhausting. So a little bit of self-care is essential. We all know this, the example of the air hostess in the plane, and she says that put the mask first on you before you put it on your child. And the same applies. Self-care is essentially any activity that you deliberately do for yourself to take care of your physical, mental, emotional well-being, and it is not being selfish. That's the myth, that doing something for ourselves is selfish. That's a myth. Because if we've not taken care of ourselves somewhere in smaller ways, it's very difficult to care for someone else. As a parent, you're going to then feel overdrawn all the time. And these are some common barriers to self-care. I must deal with this on my own. I must handle it myself because otherwise I'll be seen as weak. Otherwise, I'm a bad parent. If I do something for myself, then I will feel guilty. I can't stand that. If I ask someone, they will say no, that'll be off. All of these are barriers. But not trying to go past these barriers comes at a cost to our own health. We don't have to deal with everything on our own. We can ask for help. And if we do something for ourselves, it does not, yes, the guilt is very understandable. It's ingrained. But can I stand that? Because I need to do something for myself. Some examples of self-care, and even if we take one of these to do for ourselves and decide very consciously that this week, no matter what, I'm going to take my small 20-minute naps, or I'm going to learn something new, or I'm going to have one outing with my friends. Okay, not outing, but virtual outing, whatever, with my friends. I'm going to do something for myself, right? And what is that one thing or two things that we can do? And lastly, this is really my last slide, but we often hesitate in asking for help. As parents, as caregivers, one of the biggest reasons for burnout for caregivers is that there is such a barrier in asking for help, right? So we insist on doing everything ourselves because somewhere we feel that otherwise we are not good parents. But can we figure what are some of those things that we need help with? And can we rope in certain persons or people or family members or friends to help with certain things once in a while? Because one needs a break, right? It's not possible to function at optimal levels without one. So whether that's asking for help to handle day-to-day activities or asking for help on one day, somebody who can sit with my child for one maybe morning so that I can do something for myself that day. And yes, there may be some guilt, but still to do that for oneself. If it's sometimes getting too overwhelming, can I find someone to talk to from time to time? Someone I can identify as the person whom I'm going to vent to. Right? There are a lot of support groups for caregivers. And all of you are caregivers. And that's one forum where, coming to a webinar like this is of course one way. And another is to join a support group or to be a part of a support group where you can see that you're not alone, right? And there's some comfort in that. Not hesitating to ask for professional help if the anxiety or the anger becomes unmanageable. We don't have to always do everything on our own. That's also a demand that we make on ourselves. So very simply, can we take away what is the one thing that I need? What are the 3 or 4 things that I need? Who can help me with that? And how would I like them to help me with that? So if I want to vent, who is the person who can help? Who can be my sounding board? And then what would be okay for me? Is just chatting on WhatsApp okay enough? Or do I need a phone call? Or do I need like a Zoom call? Or do I need to meet in person? What would be okay? How would I like them to help me? If we can start to do these, then that's one step that we are taking towards caring for ourselves. So I would end on that note. And I think that we can take questions in the next 10 minutes.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarika, for your wonderful insights. And I think the first step to getting any help is the self awareness. And I think this webinar was a very good framework for us to understand how to work in terms of our own thoughts. Because, see, as parents, okay, and as special parents, all we are focused on is to get help for our children. Okay, we run to therapies, but very seldom we take help for ourselves. I think uh, one of the main goals for Forum for Autism to invite you for this webinar was so that parents get some sort of self awareness into their own thinking patterns. They themselves realize how to link their thought to the way they feel and how they act. And I feel as we are so connected to children, okay, children absorb our anxieties and our thinking patterns. So it is so important for us to first work on ourselves, first to work on our beliefs, whether they're rational, irrational, as you said, whether are we labeling the problem with our own identities, or are we viewing the problem as separate from our own. So
Right.
thank you so much for all these insights, and let's go back to the questions now. Okay, so
Yes.
okay, so how good or bad is being resilient?
How good or bad is being resilient? That's an interesting question. So I think the way, firstly, that one defines resilience is how quickly we can bounce back, right? And to that extent, in light of that, having resilience is a strength. But the problem arises when that becomes our identity, right? In the sense that, let's say we know someone who's been resilient many times in the past. They've been able to bounce back 4 times, 5 times. They've had a history of bouncing back. But now the expectation from that person and from all the rest of us of that person is that if anything happens, this person has to bounce back. That is when the problem arises. That now it's almost as if that person is telling himself or herself that I have to be strong no matter what. I'm not allowed to have a sort of a breakdown. I'm not allowed to cry. I'm not allowed to fall. I'm not allowed to lean on someone, because the expectation from me is to always be resilient and always be strong. Right? So when it gets into that space, it is problematic. It's problematic not just for that person, but even the people around. Right? So that is where we don't want to go to. And when you say resilience, the word that comes to my mind is strong. Often we tell people be strong, but nobody has to be strong all the time. It's a very unfair, unrealistic expectation to have of anyone. And I don't think any of us are strong all the time. And when adverse circumstances happen, it's okay to not feel strong, which is the reason why I say that it's okay to feel anger. It is okay to feel concern. It's okay to feel these so-called unpleasant, or what we call negative emotions. It's okay to feel that. We don't always have to be feeling positive, and we don't always have to be feeling strong. So as long as we're not making that a demand, as long as we're able to say that, yes, I do have this as a strength, and that's great, but it's quite possible that I may not always be like that. So I hope that answers your question of resilience.
I think you've wonderfully explained it, and the focus should be on the keyword must, right? We have to change the must, and that is very important.
Absolutely.
Before we proceed further, parents, we are going to run a poll for this webinar. So I would urge all the participants here to please respond to the poll so that that helps us in the having the webinars further. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Next question. Please provide your opinion and feedback on relevance of diet, gluten-free diet, and medication in controlling, managing anger.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So I frankly, I'm not much of an expert on food and diet, in the sense that I'm not very well informed on gluten. But yes, some amount of uh, uh, regulation of what we eat does play an impact. So, for example, sugar, processed foods, these do have a link on moods. Right? They can affect our moods. They can cause irritability. They can be a contributory factor. I won't say that they're directly causal, but they do play a contributory role in our moods, in our stress levels, and so on. Right? So yes, so regulating that does play a role, but I'm not very informed on gluten to be able to answer that question. The other question that you had was, sorry, if you could repeat that. The other part of the question, diet was one.
It was basically the gluten-free diet,
right.
That was asked.
Right. Medication, I think, was
and
the
medication, yeah.
Now, when I'm assuming that when you say medication, is that would you mean psychiatric medication? Is that what you're referring to?
I think probably the anti-anxiety drugs.
Anti-anxiety drugs and antidepressants, right? Okay, so there is not with everybody, but for some persons, there is a chemical composition of the brain which can also play a contributory role to depression and anxiety. So we often call that as clinical depression or major depressive condition or an illness, right? Where the chemicals in the brain or the chemical composition in the brain can play a contributory role. In such cases, it may help to have psychotherapy in conjunction with medication. But not every situation would be such where the depression or the anxiety is clinical. In some cases, it can be addressed through therapy alone or through working with one's own thoughts on one's own or using any of these techniques that I've talked about. So it really depends. It's case to case. And often if there is any doubt about it, then it's best to consult a professional to get an assessment.
Okay, a participant wants you to again demo the breathing pattern, the 4-2-3-2 pattern.
Right. Okay. So when we breathe in, we do it on the count of 4. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. You hold your breath for 2 seconds. The out breath is 3 seconds. So 1, 2, 3. And then you hold again for 2 seconds. So 4, 2, where you hold, 3, the out breath, and 2 again, where you hold. Right. So like I said, this just helps to bring the thinking brain back online.
Yes, the other question was again regarding whether any physical ailment can lead to anger.
Right. So there is an interrelation between mind and body. Physical ailment, of course, when there is something that is that causes distress, so one is as it is agitated about the physical illness, and then there are other situations also that happen around it that can further escalate anger. It a lot again depends on what are the beliefs that I have about my physical illness, right? So again, and is it There can be anger, but again, is it healthy anger or unhealthy anger depends on what my beliefs are about the ailment, right? So am I saying that I absolutely cannot deal with my ailment? Or am I saying that it's very, very hard, but what can I do to do the things that are in my control, right? So again, a lot depends on what are the beliefs. But yes, physical ailment can be a situation or an adversity which can contribute to anger. But we always say that it's not the situation that's really directly causing the anger, but it is what are we saying about the situation or the ailment, which really causes that disturbance.
Thank you so much for that, Sarika. And a parent wanted to know whether you would be giving practical strategies for children to handle their anger and anxiety issues. Do you want me to answer that, or you would like to answer that?
I think you can, Samruddhi, would you like to take that up?
Yeah. So, see, basically, parents, this webinar was mainly for parents, because if we are working with our children, we need to first look at our emotional states. We need to learn to identify our own thinking patterns. So we will definitely take up another webinar in which we would, give some practical strategies how to also apply these strategies with the children. But basically, from my experience, what I also do with my child is I use a lot of images. I use a lot of, you know, thought bubbles and speech bubbles. So making it more concrete for him. And I help him to associate the thought to the way he feels in that particular situation, and the action or the behavior. So take any instance where the child is experiencing a certain emotion. Okay, first you try to concretize the thought for him in the thought bubble with an image, and then the associated feeling, and what, also what impact it has on the parent as well as the child. So you can start with this, but I think before that, I think we need to all start with self awareness and identifying our own labeling and our own uh,
Yes,
belief systems.
yes, and just to add on to what Samruddhi said, very true. The starting point becomes us, of course, but a lot of these are teachable as well to children. A lot of these strategies are teachable as well. And when we were growing up, we were never taught these things in school. We were never taught how to deal with emotions. A lot of the times the focus was on academics. So it always helps to start having a conversation about emotions, thoughts, the linkage between the two, which are even things like different emotions, different emojis, and then having your child pinpoint what emotion he or she is feeling is a start. Because like I said, the starting point is firstly recognizing what one's emotions are and then taking it from
Uh, okay, I think there are a few more questions. Or the last one is: do you think that hormonal changes during menstrual cycle affect the tolerance of mothers? That's a very good question. I personally feel that I'm more vulnerable to unhealthy anger in
there.
second phase of my cycle.
Hmm.
Can you suggest some strategies to be worked on a routine?
Right. So I can completely understand that, and I think I can safely say that even I have struggled with that. That yes, hormonal changes can make one more vulnerable to experiencing anger and to having heightened levels of anger. What the strategies that help are what I find are many of these. So whether it's one is using relaxation, whether one is using um, uh, adequate sleep, diet, those are also ways, in fact, which are ways of managing that anger. Basically, trying to uh, if hormones is what is somewhere playing a contributory role, then with the body or for the body, what are the things that we can do? Right? So that therefore, diet, relaxation, getting adequate sleep, all of those things, the physical aspects become important. Right? So we don't want to do things which are further going to cause agitation. I don't want to, in those days, then have excess sugar. I don't want to, in those days, then have a completely unregulated diet. In those days, I want to ensure that I'm getting sleep. So I want to take the steps to make myself less vulnerable to that anger. Then if there is anger, then a lot of the coping strategies remain the same. But what can I do to at least make myself a little less vulnerable from a body point? And again, for some, what is the kind of the choice of exercise also that you may use also varies. So for some, yoga it becomes very helpful. I haven't really talked about these things because a lot of this is intuitive and a lot of these things are things that you're already doing. But these are just ways of making our body less vulnerable.
Yeah, and a parent wants your number. So I think for all those who wish to have Sarika's contact number, can take it from Priyanka. And yes, she is based in Mumbai.
Yes.
Would you like to give a brief about your NGO that you're running?
Yes. So I am a psychotherapist with InVivo, somebody already talked about in the beginning. And I do also run an NGO, which is called Open Minds. We work in the space of child abuse prevention. So we go to schools and private schools as well as aided schools and municipal schools, and we talk about safety. We talk about safe and unsafe touch. We talk about gender sensitization. We talk about comprehensive sex education, and not just with children, but also teachers and parents. So that is one way in which we try to create safer spaces. We also then do similar work with corporates. And I facilitate a support group for adult survivors of child abuse. So that's the work that we do. So if anyone has any queries regarding that as well, feel free to get in touch.
Okay, so parents, thank you for being wonderful listeners and asking so many questions. And I'm sure that we have a lot of takeaways from this webinar. And I think the main thing is consistency, right? How we really implement all these things day to day in our lives.
Yes.
And thank you so much, Sarika, for all the wonderful insights.
Thank you, Samriddhi, for having me today.
Yeah.
And
Bye
thank
for
you.
today. Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you all.